So what we're going to talk about today, well, welcome back to Venture Outfitter. I'm excited to have a very diverse group today. We have everywhere from Russia to Nigeria to Texas to Mexico. And if there's anyone else from like some other part of the world that'd like to just, say, hey, I'm here from this part of the world, I'd love to actually have you do that. So it's great to have everyone here. What we've been doing, and I want to make sure that this isn't just hidden to just a handful of people. Anyone who wants to join us, every once in a while, for a few minutes early, we'll start asking questions and just be informal even before we have a speaker. Now, today I happen to be today's speaker. I realize that there's some return to some of the basics that some of us need to do, even TechCrunch, as we're refactoring some of our work and going to the next level. And we have a program that will be running again in the coming weeks called Venture Forth. We're going to do it. We're going to be doing it as virtual. But make a long story short, we've run 45 different cohorts of this in the past. And it's one of my favorite programs, but I realized that part of what we needed to do today is just actually have some of the concepts and bring them in, because part of the power of having a community of practice, this group of people, is we have a language that together we can actually get stronger and go to the next level, right? That's the whole idea. And there's one practice we're going to talk about today called the Lean Canvas and the Lean Startup Practices that I want to talk through. Now I have, if you've done this before with Ash Moria or Eric Ries, I have kind of my own take on it as well. And Ash Moria is a friend of mine. I haven't seen him in a long time, but early on in the whole process of him building out his Lean Canvas and his process, we actually got to interact with a lot, with each other a bunch. And so I kind of tend to look at, if some of you all know about the business model canvas and the Lean Canvas, I kind of lean more towards the Lean Canvas just because, I got to have my own little thumbprint put on it. And I think Ash took some of those ideas and put them into to the process that he's working with. That being said, what we'll do is we're going to talk about that today. I also would like to make sure we reserve some time when it's, usually one of us speaking, one of the core team speaking. We have a little bit more time for actually interacting at the end of the time. And we'll try to do that just like we did right beforehand. At the beginning of the classes, if you ever want to sneak in early, like usually I'll be here 15 minutes earlier. If you ever want to sneak in a question or two, if you need something from me, that's always a great time to be somewhat informal. So just know that that's open. So let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And as I'm sharing my screen, I would love to get, a while ago before we started filming, Artie asked a question. Artie, go ahead and ask that question again.
You expect my memory to be that long, huh? So basically, the gist of it was, let me put a little bit of back picture to this. Kevin and I had been bouncing some conversations around about the importance of failure and risk and all that sort of stuff. So before the meeting started, I said, "Hey, Kevin," he was offering what questions you got for me, and I said, "Well, can you tell us the thing that you've learned the most from failure? That sort of thing that's kind of become your like once bitten, twice shy sort of moment where you go, I've learned that lesson before, and I've held on to it, right? But it really points to failure, and you may have heard some things like education's expensive no matter how you obtain it, right? People tend to go, oh, education is more valuable through experience or more valuable through, going to college or something. But few people deny the value of that, of some form of education. So that's kind of where the gist of that, the underpinnings of that question lie.
Yeah, so I think that that's an important thing. And as you talk about it, I actually want to even suggest that we probably should have a failure class, or not class. We wouldn't even call it a class. We should have like a celebration of failure at some point for one of the coming.
Yeah, that was actually the gist of it, because that was actually the gist of it, is because we have a lot of people that get up and go, well, you should listen to me because I'm important and I've reached this status, right? And it really paints this whole distorted, nonsensical map of the journey and how you get there. And people look at it, and what I'm interested in lowering the barriers to entry. It's like a huge passion of mine. For
Yep.
those who don't know, I spent some time homeless and dumpster diving because I had some crazy ass parents as a
Yeah.
child. And so it's really made me cognizant of those artificial barriers to entry, and those can be internal. But it can be really hard to see that gap without actually going, oh, they didn't just jump there, right? They had step after step after step, but that perseverance lesson, right?
In fact, let's talk about that. So one of the things that I actually think is important about being, so everyone knows, or I'll mention this as well. So the whole model, the pedagogical model, the training model of Tech Ranch is based around the martial arts. I've practiced Japanese martial arts for the last 30 years. And because of that, I have a lot of scars. I've separated the shoulder. I had surgery right here to put my arm back together. I screwed up both my knees on the mats. I dislocated this shoulder. I ruptured my cartilage on this knuckle. Lots of scars, lots of scars. Now, I also think that I'm somewhat proficient after 30 years of martial arts on actually being in the martial arts. And one of the things that's interesting is, as a child, I was taught by my mom, to her credit, hey, don't do anything crazy. Don't, you know, and so it wasn't until I got to college that I really started realizing, wait, I got to do something, because I was so fearful about always getting hurt that I never got hurt. But I also never did anything. So I got into that first judo class, and then I got into my first taekwondo class, then I got into my first karate class. And it wasn't until I had my first shoulder separation that I really started to learn about this whole process of entrepreneurship. I think entrepreneurship and studying the martial arts are very similar in that, and we'll talk about this more in another program, but I want to touch on it as we get into the lean startup practices. Entrepreneurship is, you can't read about it in a book. You really can't learn entrepreneurship alone either. Just like you can't learn a martial art alone, you can't learn entrepreneurship alone, right? You have to have, like, the great thing about having this group of people here is we can work back and forth, and we can learn together. You know, and even though I might be a 3-degree black belt in Aikido, I can still learn from a white belt as long as I'm paying attention to what's happening. Part of what I want to do is, when Artie asked me that question earlier before we started filming, I thought it was a perfect thing. I've had a lot of failures as an entrepreneur. When I look at, you know, my face has been on the cover of Computer World magazine as well, but I don't know, I didn't take the easy route out. And I think that there's a power to that at times that's interesting to be thinking about how, what is it we can do in entrepreneurship so that we don't have so many failures. So I'm going to talk about this program from that standpoint about what's there. It's always funny too. If you guys ever need, I'm getting now text about people saying, hey, how do I get on? How do I get on? Just main thing to know is, if you ever need the links, just so that I don't get all the text right at the last minute on getting on, they're always going to be on techranch.com/events, just so you know. But we'll figure out how to get the information to him a little bit later, so I don't stop and take away from you guys. So back to this. Part of what I want to talk about today is called Iterating to Success. One of the biggest big pains in the butts about entrepreneurship is, when we're building something, if we knew the answer, we wouldn't have to go explore, right? The safety of, like, one of the things that entrepreneurs have to learn the hard way, that most business people never have to truly learn, is that we don't really know what's the business model we're untested team with an unproven product, an unknown customer, unknown market, right? There's all these unknowns, right? And you're having to figure out each one of those. And it's like RD was talking about failure. So let me answer the question. There was a project that I started that, as I was thinking about this project for today's class, I started a tool called commitmentmanagement.com. In fact, if you go to commitmentmanagement.com, you're probably going to see the dregs of something that should have been destroyed a long time ago. And I spent quite literally $50,000 of my own money to build that out. And it was valuable. It's like I got to go to Harvard or something like that, or some business school, because I spent that much money on something that, I got a couple of customers, but I didn't really get the customer success that I wanted. I probably got my money back, but I didn't have any business success out of it. The whole idea behind commitment management is you should manage if you're going to manage a team, you shouldn't do hierarchical management like most of the project management tools out there. You should have commitments so you can actually have people, point to point. It's a beautiful idea, beautiful philosophy, beautiful technology. I actually, interestingly enough, had a guy that was in Moscow that built it out for me. And he did a wonderful job, excellent engineering. That was my first experience with Russians as engineers, and just had an amazing experience through the process on the product side. But on the customer side, it was actually what the Chileans would call a fracaso. That's a nice way of saying it wasn't a very pleasant experience. And it's because of these things, right? I didn't really know who my customer was. And because of that, the whole idea ended up being problematic. So the only way to do this is to iterate to success. It's just like in martial arts. It's like, did anyone ever see, the Karate Kid? What did Mr. Misogi say to young Daniel-san? Yeah, like Paulina's doing this. She's saying, wax on, wax off. And Daniel-san, the protagonist in the movie is like, why is he getting me to wax his car? Why is he having me paint his fence? It's because let's work little by little by little and develop a muscle. And then at some point it becomes a fighting ability. Or in the case of entrepreneurship, these simple processes that we can do, that if we continue to do them and we're conscious of it, we can actually get to the point that we actually have some level of success.
You just got to go through the motion before you connect that brain to what you need to happen.
Yep. Exactly.
Just clarify, is this supposed to be as far as the things that you have seen amidst all the experience you've thus gained, or was this like during your first test run whenever you were starting off before TechCrunch?
This was one of my personal failures of investing money in one of my own ideas.
Okay.
Because it was certainly a very personal failure, because I was the entrepreneur. I was the point person. It was my ship. And at some point I'll make a list of failures that I'll like tell you all about them. But this one was specifically me as an entrepreneur, just making mistakes about how to go about to build something out. Like, it never made so much sense to just build something. I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, build it and they will come. That's not always true. You can build a beautiful piece of software or a beautiful product, and the customers don't just come. In the 90s, when I got started as an entrepreneur, it was still kind of true. That was still kind of true. Like when I started building e-commerce engines in the early 90s, we were one of the few people who knew what e-commerce was. And so lots of people said, hey, wait, I hear you have an e-commerce engine. We need to do e-commerce. And, it's simple. The market is much more complex now than it was at the time. And so the idea that I want to tell the story about, why do you think the F-16 is designed like this. I want to tell you a little bit about the story. Anyone have like a specific thing that they point out? It's probably someone already knows the details about why this plane is designed like this. Anyone? Anyone? I'll tell you the story.
Made by committee.
Well, no, actually, the F-16 was the first plane that was like a radical departure from what had happened. We had jet fighters, and then we had faster jet fighters, and then we had more powerful, faster jet fighters, and then we had more powerful, faster jet fighters. And this was the first jet fighter that came out that was actually less powerful, but much more maneuverable than anything before. One of the things I want to reflect on about this is, how is it that startups can actually beat large corporations? How is it that it's possible that a startup company can take on existing industry incumbents in the market? The F-16 gives us some ideas about this. Now, the person who's responsible for the group that actually designed the F-16 was called John Boyd. This is him. He was a Air Force captain at the time of this photo. He was known as 42nd Boyd. In 40 seconds, in any of the conflicts that he was in, he more than likely was able to, usually like into just fake dogfights, he was actually able to take out the other guys in 40 seconds. And, you know, he was really unique because he'd engage and then all of a sudden he'd won and everyone else is like, wait, we just got started. He's the person who's actually responsible for why the F-16 is the way it is. What he noticed was in some of the conflicts like Korea, he said, why is it that this plane was able to shoot down more of these planes? And the only idea that I really want to focus on is there is certain aspects about the way that the fighter was designed that we want to design our startups in a similar way where we can actually get as much information in as possible. And by getting more information in, our chance of success go way up compared to the mistake that I made when I wasted $50,000 and more than 8 months of my life on an idea called commitment management. He came up with a very, very simple idea. He said, if you want to do something, you should observe what's happening, then orient to whatever you think is the next piece. Decide what you're going to do, and then act. Now, most of the time, when I went through engineering school, we were taught we should focus on each one of those boxes and make each box successful. But the thing that John Boyd was saying is, you don't want to focus on each one of the boxes. You want to focus on getting through the loop as rapidly as you can. You want to actually, you know, make a decision, act, and move forward. You want to, you know, like just move. This is why he was able to, you know, have, you know, the F-16 was so maneuverable that it was so maneuverable that it can even though it was slower than other jet fighters, it was able to react really fast and, you know, turn really fast to re-engage in conflict. Same thing about startups, but the only problem is a lot of times the way, at least I was taught in engineering school, I was taught by people that were in large corporations and large academic careers that, you know, said, no, each one of these boxes about deciding what you're going to do and figuring this out, you need to actually work through and do over, you know, make sure each box is perfect. Whereas Boyd, the key idea that I'm actually trying to say was, let's figure out how we can observe what's going on, orient to what we think is happening, decide, and then act, and then just do it over and over and over. He was so capable of doing this as a fighter pilot that he was actually orienting around in every 40 seconds. Does this make sense? Does y'all get the concept I'm pointing to? Someone give me like a little bit of feedback about that. Oh, are we disconnected?
No, you're good, Kevin. It makes sense.
Good. Keep going.
Hello.
I'll unmute. That way I can grunt and grumble at you every so often.
You're going the right direction. I mean, we hear you. Or did we lose him? Yep, I think
I can't believe we lost me.
No.
there he is.
Hey guys, what part did y'all hear last? I was just asking y'all for, I'm not sure why I have a wire.
You were doing good. You were there.
I didn't hear anything cut out, Kevin. I didn't hear any audio drop at all, or video.
Wait, tell me this, the question I was having, does this concept make sense? Are you all getting the concept that I'm pointing to?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. Okay. I apologize about the internet connection. I quite literally have a hardwired connection to Spectrum, and it shouldn't be dropping. So it shouldn't be dropping, and maybe we need better. I need to have someone. Yeah, someone should start a new internet service provider here in Austin, Texas, because we have like incumbents that need to be eaten. Okay, back to
we had a couple of good guys at the last in-person meeting that we had. We had some guys that were talking 6G and a bunch of high tech. We need to track them down.
Yeah, exactly. You know, that's exactly what's needed. All right, well, back to this. The key idea that I wanted to say was, it makes sense, this idea about iterating through things, that the company that can iterate the fastest, whether it's a startup or a corporation, is the one that can win. Does this make sense? Someone give me feedback. Jorge, what do you hear me saying? Give me an example of how it applies to your own business.
Well, we're presenting now for it's a pitch for a prize in Mexico, and it's totally focused on COVID and solutions about COVID. So we've been praised by being able to shift our service so fast to the current situation. So we know that as a service company, we can adapt really easily, really fast.
Well, and this is the one thing that you all have. The one thing that you have as startup entrepreneurs is you can adapt quickly. But many of us were not brought up in the environment to adapt quickly. My very first job, actually, I was real lucky that I had a lot of early jobs. I worked in a lab. I worked at IBM. I worked at Motorola. Then I worked at a Steve Jobs company called Next. So I got lucky because I had a lot of different experiences. But if I had just stuck to the way that they were training me at IBM, I never could have been a startup guy. Just because the IBM way is, in quarter one, we do the following thing. In quarter two, that is April through June, we're going to do the following thing. Then through July through August, we're going to do the following thing. And then through, September through December, we're going to do the following thing, right? That was very, very slow. Whereas the normal startup can decide something in month one, and by month three, be in a whole different business, right? Very flexible. This is how this ties in to the point I'm making about the F-16. But a lot of us give up that advantage as entrepreneurs because we have some background that we're not aware of. The whole point that I'm making by this first part about talking about the lean canvas is you should be looking at the way that you can actually, evolve, move, figure out what you need to very, very rapidly. This is the one thing you have as a startup entrepreneur. Your corporate competitors, they can outspend you. They have more people, they have more brain cycles, they have all these different pieces. But what they don't have is they actually can't interact in that speed that you can. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think decision-making time is the big one. I mean, in the larger corporations, decision-making time just takes forever, and you've got to go up the food chain, multiple levels, and then get an answer. And by the time you play that game, you've lost so much time to react and respond. And and we, as a startup, we don't have that. And we can
exactly. Well, even for large corporations, when Dell Computer Corporation hired my first company to build their e-commerce engine, they didn't even want us on site. Because inside the large corporations, innovation, like what we were doing at the Dell Online site, I was actually person number 3 there was a long-term Dell employee, a long-term Dell manager, and then there was Kevin with his startup that actually was doing e-commerce. They hit us off-site and what's called a skunk works because they recognize exactly what you're saying, Russell. Not only do the decisions have to go all the way up, the problem is that whatever you're working on at a large corporation is probably a threat to the guy that's 3 desks over, right? And because it's a threat, the likeliness is they'll never get there, or they'll get there very slow. Now, when they get there, they're going to get there to dominate. But I'd much rather them buy you guys so that you have a nice exit and you can actually make that happen. That's what's real exciting about this.
I'm going to play devil's advocate and say, but how do you think the large corporations started out? They didn't just get to be where they're at for no reason. So,
well, but that's the thing is that they end up losing it. The thing that actually makes you good at building a company doesn't necessarily make you good at starting a company. And one of the things that we need to have just for the integrity of a business building program is we'll talk about in a future session what I call more the venture builder level. We have venture start level stuff that is for the people that are newbies. No, I don't see anyone new here for starting companies, at least in the frame here. There's certain things you want to do at the very, very start. Artie, you've already been in business. You've already started something. So yeah, I see you raising your hand. But so there's people that are like at the very early stage at starting where you're actually like, what does it mean to start a company, that sort of stuff. And then you have things are what we call at the venture fourth level of you're in the launch level. Or if you're actually already building something, but you want to launch to the next level, these are the tactics that we're talking about today that help you launch to the next level. That's what we call in our historical perspective, venture fourth. And then when you truly get into the growth stage, that's what we call venture builder. Now, for those of you all that are experienced in lean startup practices, they came up with a similar set of stages. They call it problem solution fit. Then they call it product market fit, and then they call it growth. And it's just funny that we both recognized in the time frame, the lean startup guys and TechRanch recognized that there are 3 different groupings. We just call them slightly different, but there is something really valuable to looking at the lean startup practices. So what I want to do is I want to switch. And the number one thing that actually helps, what is the OODA? That stands for observe, orient, decide, act, just like you see here. You can read more about this loop. It's really valuable. I think that this concept is more valuable than the more complicated lean startup practices. That being said, I think that the lean startup guys really did find some really interesting things to work on, or the way that they present things. In the early stages of TechRanch, we would talk about the OODA loop so that you could actually say, okay, how is it you go figure out? Because we have an untested team, unproven market. We don't really know our customer. We don't know what we should offer to them in all those different pieces. So let's talk through that. The key thing is always to operate in a question. The mistake to the question that RD asked me earlier, I wasn't operating in a question with regards to commitmentmanagement.com. I wasn't operating in a question. I was certain. I said, I've seen this idea. It's a beautiful idea. It's going to revolutionize project management. And the world just needs to open their arms to Kevin Koym and commitment management. And that was a mistake. Yeah, no, it was totally a mistake in that I wasn't operating in a question. I was just saying, and some of you know that I have a big ego, and some of you know that there are things, and I'm like, and God said, it's going to be the following way, right? That was not the way to build a company. It was like, it was an interesting experience. I have a lot of scar tissue. I lost around $50,000 on it. I spent about 8 months of my life on this, but I wasn't operating in a question. And that's one of the things that I think is interesting as we look at the OODA loop, or if we look at lean startup. So let's talk about lean startup. This is the lean canvas. I assume that you guys have seen that. Who's seen the lean canvas before?
Evan, we can't see your screen anymore. At least am I the only one?
You know what? I think
we lost the presentation.
Kevin's just teasing us and not showing the screen.
There you go. Thanks.
Thank you. I think when it dropped me, I didn't realize that it took away my screen. All right, here's the lean canvas. Who has actually seen this before? I'm just wondering.
I have, Kevin. We have worked with
Yep.
Yes.
In passing.
So the idea about this is a fancy way of having on one page your business model. Now, there are two different families about this. Some of you would have read about the business model canvas and the lean canvas. And like I said at the beginning of our program, the idea here is the lean canvas, I think, is a little bit more, it's easier for me to understand. Now, partially because I got to help a guy named Ash Moria to work on it, and I worked with him early on in the process. He's another Austinite, and was one of my friends that I knew from a group here in Austin called Bootstrap Austin. So I might be biased because of that, but whether it's the business model canvas or the lean canvas, the idea that I was pointing to a while ago about iterating through over and over and over, that's the key idea. That's the key idea. Now, whether you're looking at business model canvas or lean canvas. So let's go ahead and talk about the lean canvas. The idea about this is that we want to go through and have 9 different questions that cover the business model. I'll ask Kristen, we have a document that we can share with you that has this in Excel. And there is also a very, very beautiful tool that Ash and his team have put together as well that you can use as well. I don't think you need to have a tool. You can just have an Excel spreadsheet and go through on this. In fact, when I now start a business or when I'm evaluating a new business idea, I just print out one of the Excel spreadsheets and I still use pen and paper, right? I'll print one of them out and I'll just scribble in it as I think through things. For me, it's still easier to not use the computer, but to actually use the structure of just working back and forth on paper, right? So the thing that we'll go through is, it says customer segment. You notice there's some numbers on here. The numbers actually come from the way Ash walks people through. I noticed that Ash and I think about this a slightly different way, but I really like his work, so I'm pointing to him. And you can grab some of his books and things like that. We have some of them on the suggested book list. That being said, the key idea, I just want to go through, you don't have to have all that to go through and know. You always should be asking a question and you should be iterating as rapidly as you can as you go through this concept. So that's the context now. Let me give you the content of this idea. It starts right here in customer segment. Who is it that you want to sell to? Who is it you want to sell to? Now, a lot of times I'll have individuals come to me and say, hey, we want to sell to manufacturing, as an example. Since I see Marcelo that's here as part of today, I'm going to actually talk about a little bit about Hesta Labs and his company. Initially, when he came to us, they've got some beautiful AI, artificial intelligence, and in computer vision systems that can be used in a lot of different ways. One of the problems about that is there's lots of people doing AI. There's lots of people doing computer vision. The main thing you want to do is with a customer segment, you want to get to as small a segment as possible and then iterate through it. As an example, in this case, it could be something like the customer segment that they went from was anyone in manufacturing to food manufacturing. Now they're actually going down to even smaller segments inside of that, as an example. For you guys, one of the ways, if you're up against a competitor that's a multi-billion-dollar company, one of the ways of going up against a multi-billion-dollar company is saying, I'm going to find a segment that's only $30 million large. Now, long-term, obviously that's too small of a segment, right? Long-term, you might want to have a multi-billion-dollar market. But for right now, having a target that's only that small, that then you can actually say, I'm going to just go through and see if I can say the right words to sell to that group. That's where you start here. Then you go to number 2, what's the problem that the customer is having? Not the general problem, not the overall problem, but what's the problem that this customer segment is saying? That's the second one. And then the third, and this is where Kevin differentiates from Ash, and then I think that you should say customer segment, problem, and then solution. I'm a little bit different than Ash, and I'm pointing this out. Ash has gone much farther with the actual work of defining the lean canvas. But my bias is, if you already know that you're going to be selling to this segment of people because maybe you came from that group, and you're going to say, okay, they're having this general problem. Here's the solution for that, right? Problem, solution, customer segment, or customer segment, problem, solution. The idea is on each one of these, you want to operate in a question. You want to have a statement of what you think the answer is for that. Customer segment is food manufacturers within 100 miles of Austin, Texas. That is one example that Marcelo and his team might or might not use. I'm just making that up. The second one is, the problem is that in the context of coronavirus, it's expensive to have workers working with food because, you know, coronavirus and food and all the rest of us, that could be problematic. So that might be a problem. And here's the solution. The solution is computer vision system that allows the following thing. Jorge raised his hand. Jorge, what's your question?
Kevin, I remember that you suggested to add a box in here with the hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
That has been really useful for us. So what do you think that is going to happen? And that's very interesting to guide you through this link canvas.
Yeah, in fact, Jorge has put, I realized that I might have, as I was preparing for today's lecture, I might not have said this, that one of the things, I might have taken the slide out that actually said this. Most of us were exposed to the scientific method in one of our, you know, middle school or high school science classes. What is it? It's like, you make a hypothesis and then you go test the hypothesis. Same thing for us. And that's where we want to do it. We want to make a hypothesis about what is the problem, what is the customer segment, what is the solution, and then we go test it. And instead of taking 6 to 8 months to test it, like RD was pointing out on my business failure, let's do it this week, right? If you've ever been in one of our Venture Forth classes, or if you're like Jorge is, you're in the innovation bridge between Mexico and Austin, a lot of what we're actually talking about is, I would challenge people, how do you validate your business within the next week? If you ever heard me push you.
Happens in the like hackathons and things of that nature, they'll have you just go outside and start calling people and get that feedback immediately. And sometimes those businesses crash in a matter of hours because there's things that the customers point out that weren't even on your radar.
Yeah, like you might have like in my case, I was just so blind that about the existing project management process that, you know, people are like, well, we're training our project managers into the PMP system, and this is the way we're going to do things, when it's fundamentally flawed. But truth is, I was in the wrong customer segment, and I wasn't even doing it. And RD said that you crash and burn, but I would actually challenge that. It's that you don't crash and burn because you figured it out in hours, what, you know, Kevin did in 8 months. It means that you actually have that much more time to go forward. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's not really the context that I was trying to reference it at. It was
no, I know.
You realize, you become aware of what you didn't know sooner, so you know not to keep bashing your head against the wall.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And so the idea is, when you start with this, Ash is saying that you actually do customer segment, problem, and then unique value proposition. I'm finding that in the experience that we've had with our entrepreneurs, I say customer segment, there's usually a segment that people are, you know, that entrepreneurs already come from, right? For the business side of the house, for entrepreneurs that are coming from a business background, they typically already know a customer segment that they feel comfortable with. For engineers, they typically come from a solution that they know. Like I see Igor, one of our entrepreneurs in Tumen, Russia. And as an example, that guy's got engineering capability on top of engineering capability on top of engineering capability. And so he's going to start on this, probably on the solution square. And then, go ahead.
I was going to go back. So, do you think that the scientific method is outdated? I mean, it's a tried and true method for a reason, right? But do you think that it's outdated as far as where things have shifted with the technology advancements we have, or?
No, actually, I think it's valid, completely valid as a process. The main thing about it is what happened a lot of times was the stuff that we learned in science class about hypothesis process, the scientific method process. For whatever reason, we weren't applying over in the business school. Because typically, once a company gets going, most of the work that, most of the influence in most of the major business schools, at least in the United States, comes from large corporations and not from the startups. And the thing that was missing that's really starting to develop now over the last 10 years is a practice of how to be a startup entrepreneur versus how to be a business person, right? How to be a business person in a large corporation, you're really not using the scientific method. Versus to be an entrepreneur, you have to learn how to use the scientific method. We're just using slightly different language about it. So I think it's perfectly valid. It's just recognized. It's recognized in most large corporations, you're not testing new hypotheses, and you're doing, okay, how do we get from where we were last year plus 3%? You know, very incremental, right? Whereas a startup entrepreneur is starting with, you know, flat earth or nothing, you know, or starting with what's in my hand, and then actually having to, you know, to build something from there, right? And in that, the scientific method is actually great because you're really creating new knowledge. Whereas in the corporation, you're not necessarily creating new knowledge. You can, but it's only incremental. Does that make sense, Paulina?
It does, yes, thank you. Because I actually had, so I've actually, some things have shifted. And so the startup that I, initially started off with, I'm no longer part of, but that was kind of something that the main organizational person of ours was referencing is, let's go back to the scientific method. And I hadn't heard about that in years. And so I was kind of surprised of where does that really come from?
Well, yeah, no, it's a really great process. It's just, I think when I got into business for myself and when I was in engineering school, they didn't talk about it. You know, you don't talk about the scientific method in engineering. And all the business classes I took at UT, we didn't talk about testing. We just talked about, okay, this is the way you roll out products, right? And so it's to RD's point that he started the question with at the very beginning. All that scar tissue is where I was like, oh, wait, I just wasted 8 months of my life and $50,000. And that kind of sucks. That was a hard lesson. So on reflection, I came back to that same thing. Now, all these years later, where, here we are, and we actually have a set of practices like lean startup practice. And, we start, we can actually do that. RD, you had a question or you had a statement?
Just, over the years, I've kind of developed a mantra that's sort of like a calm myself down and sort of bridge the gap in that language. And I reference it as step one in the scientific method of problem solving is define the problem.
Yep.
Which is that, what does the customer want? So it's that kind of calming mantra of, okay, it's exciting. Now, step one, right? Define the problem.
Now,
what does the customer want?
Where
you get paid.
When the thing that we need to recognize is a lot of times, I'm a little bit wary of the entrepreneurs that walk out of wherever they, appear from, that are so confident that they know everything that they're just, everything's going to open up for them. Like as an example, I did get to work for Steve Jobs, and I think him and a handful of people on the planet are very unique in that they truly have vision for having everything figured out. Now, even Steve Jobs had difficulty with that, and that's why, the
Lisa.
The Lisa is a good example. The Lisa is a beautiful computer. I remember when I saw the first Lisa, this was the computer that was prior to the Macintosh, but it ended up being a complete failure in that it was just overpriced and had lots of features that, just no one was going to buy. No one was going to buy. It wasn't until he stepped back and had a more humble approach, which was the Macintosh, but then was revolutionary, right? Totally revolutionary.
Doesn't that
Just-
kind of defeat your point of he was so brilliant, he figured it out right off the bat?
Yeah, no way. That's the whole point that I'm making, right? That I think that the entrepreneurs, like part of what I'm actually trying to say for our community of practice is that we need to recognize that, you know, to the point that I think we make a lot, none of us really have it figured out because it's an unknown market. It's an untested team. It's an unknown customer. You know, we don't know if the product's going to come together as well, right? All those different pieces, right?
Well, I'm trying to offer a counterpoint that you offered him up as one of these few people in the world that was brilliant enough to see the future. And I think it's nonsense. I think that perseverance is more important than that, you know, nonsensical clairvoyance.
Agreed. Well, I'm trying to stay focused on Paulina's question. Let me actually ask, other than RD, is there any other questions that anyone wanted to say? I noticed that a couple of y'all were coming off and on of mute. Russell?
Yeah, I think that, you know, I think one of the good ones that, you know, there's a, you know, when you go back to Iacocca and you look at some of the work that he did, and also like Lutz, you know, one of the things that going through the leadership model, especially for us entrepreneurs, is understanding that, you know, a lot of times most of the people don't see the vision that we have and they don't recognize what's capable of happening. So you're going through a process of learning and being able to communicate. And as an engineer, I mean, the scientific method's pretty easy, but learning to trust that, you know, learning to trust that the vision that you have may be beyond what is, you know, the market stands today. So, you know, like Ford always said, if he listened to the customer, all of his cars would be black, you know, so,
Right.
you know, and, you know, so it's having some type of, at some point you have to stand up and go beyond and say, look, my vision is there's something that's new, and all of us are working on something that's new that nobody else is doing.
But
And so
see,
being able to do
where
that's important.
that's where Apple was a great example of that.
Right.
Knew what his vision was and he was very firm with it, but then he also realized that if he doesn't adjust his strategy, he's not going to get anything out of it. So
One of my favorite
The
entrepreneurs.
example of the sorry, I
Yeah.
think the example actually I'm writing we're collaborating with Forbes Mexico, and actually I just wrote an article and I used the example of Lisa and the first iPhone. It's interesting that the first iPhone didn't have Bluetooth, didn't have copy paste feature, didn't have a search, didn't have a lot of things. But even though it was named the breakthrough in 2007, I think was. The thing is, it's a good example to use Lisa and the iPhone that I think Steve Jobs really learned the lesson with Lisa. That was too advanced and was too expensive for its time. And when they launched the iPhone, even though it didn't have a lot of things, it was still a breakthrough, even though it was lacking some features that even the phones that were at that time had. So I think that example is pretty neat.
Exactly. Well, and Rafa, please share that link to your Forbes article when you get a chance.
Yeah,
I'd love to get you some more exposure on that. Because that's a good example. That's a great example.
Yeah, we're talking about actually lean startup and agile in that article. It's going to be published, I think, next week. We need to send it this week for Forbes. Once it's up, I will share it. It's in Spanish, but Google makes a
perfect
job on
That's perfect. So what we'll do specifically about that, by the way, as a side note, one of the things that's coming very soon and the next few weeks as well, this will actually happen fairly soon. I want to start doing this where when one of you actually has something to say, hey, we have this type of information to share, like you have like a win or something like that. Like as an example, one of our South Korean companies just got purchased, and we're going to get more social media on that, just because, kind of it's like, hey, look the great thing that happened, or the article from Rafa. Part of what we can do as a community of practice is just point is saying, hey, look, this guy over here just posted the following thing, and get more exposure all the way around. That's one thing that's coming. Think the Raphael's example is a perfect example of that. One of the things I want to say, though, stepping back, and I heard this in Rafa's example, is how can you be a visionary like a Steve Jobs, recognize the failure of Lisa, the Lisa computer, but then still move towards your vision. My friend and a very successful entrepreneur, Roy Williams, talks about it this way. He says, you have to pick whatever the North Star is for you, like whatever the star that you're going towards is. And instead of just expecting that you're going to be able to go straight there, like, you know, think about it. If you're on water, you really can't go straight there unless you have a lot of power and a lot of gas and a lot of that sort of stuff. Typically, in his metaphor, it's more like sailing. And how do you actually go sailing, right? If you're going to this place over here, we have to sail this way, then we have to sail back this way, we sail back this way, we sail back this way. You know, we start with an iPhone that doesn't have copy and paste. Or the iPhone that the second generation model, if you touched right here on it, you drop a call. It was like, there's fundamental problems with the technology, but still they got there. Now this is the 7th edition. We're now on the 11th and the 12th edition. The idea is figure out where your point is that you're going to, if you have a vision, and then go towards it that way versus trying to force it all the way there. You know, back to the RD story there, or the story that RD asked me about, the failure was I had it all convinced. And I spent the money to have projects and sub-projects. Now, you guys don't know what sub-projects is on this thing, but as an example, sub-projects, that feature cost me more than $5,000 directly out of my own pocket. But it never was used by customers, never once. And it would have been nice to have that time back and have that money back so that we could actually do some other things. That's the kind of concept that I'm talking about. All right, let's go through the rest of the lean canvas. We'll wrap up in a slide or two anyway. I want to make sure I talk about this really quick. We start with customer segment. We then go to the problem. What's the problem that the customer segment is having? And it's not a large customer segment, it's a small customer segment. And we actually, tie those two. Customer segment, problem, solution. The fourth one for me is the third one for Ash, which is the unique value proposition. What is the message that you need to say to the customer that, what's the unique thing that has them recognize the value that you're creating? The fourth, I'm just going to keep on going through. I don't hop around as much after the first three. The first three, I think, are really fundamentally important. The fourth one being here. And so you'll just see the comparison as we go through it. This says unfair advantage. We called it competitive advantage. Usually at the very beginning of a process of building a company, it's really hard to find an unfair advantage. If you have patentable work, you can patent things, but a lot of times you have to figure out, you won't be able to patent something because a patent's not going to deliver any value to you for 2 years. You might not get the patent. You don't have any clear capability on that. So an unfair advantage might be that you're able to set up a set of relationships, like a business relationship that's unique to you, that actually gives you an unfair advantage or competitive advantage. The competitive advantage that you want to have is one that where a larger competitor, even with lots of money and lots of time, still can't beat you, right? You still are protected. The next one is key metrics. Key metrics, what are the things you should pay attention to as you're building the company? Obviously, all of us have to pay attention to revenue. In Jorge's case, Jorge's business is all about architecture and about creating spaces that are livable environments. And so for him, it might be number of people, one of the key metrics might be number of people under the roofs that we create, right? It might be something else. Like that's what is it you want? Like how are you keeping score is a good example here. The next one is channels. What are your channels to getting to customers? a lot of times startups, if they have the right channel partner, the person who already knows the customers, a channel partner can say, like, if I sell coffee cups and I have access to the company Walmart as, a store that I can sell my coffee cups in, Walmart's a channel partner, right? So where can I actually sell my product being coffee mugs in this case? Walmart would be a great example. For you, it might be, how is it you actually can drive your products forward, like with a much larger company? The next one is cost structure. What are your costs? And then the next one is, what are your revenue streams? On your revenue streams as well, you have to be very, very, very careful. The revenue streams, as an example, is you really can only focus on maybe 1 or 2 revenue streams to prove them out. Years ago, one of my favorite examples of explaining a kind of a failure case was we had a company that was doing composting. It was one of the Tech Ranch companies. They had a unique way that they do composting, and they created a business where the business was set up so that they would pick up material from restaurants, like, the uneaten food that's being thrown away. If you throw it away into this bin, it costs you $12 because that's regular trash, $12 per bin. But if you throw it into this one, it's only going to cost you $8, right? That was their first revenue stream.
Real quick,
yes,
I
go ahead.
want to say thank you.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
have to hop off, so thank you so much.
Thanks for being here, Paulina, and thanks for supporting our Russian entrepreneurs. I hope that was productive for everyone.
Bye.
Yeah. Cool. Well, what we'll continue to do, by the way, is just like Paulina was pointing out, Paulina reached out to me and said, hey, how can I help? I love the idea of actually, as we build this community of practice, how we can help each other. Like as an example, I can't speak Russian yet. And Igor and I needed a little bit of help when we were having a conversation a few days ago. And I was like, hey, Paulina, help us out. And she said she's originally from Moscow. We'll do that. If you have other capabilities that you'd like to bring to the community and to advertise them, maybe even sell some of your services there, that's great. Okay, back to this. Make a long story short, this one entrepreneur that was doing this business had 5 different revenue models, picking stuff up from the restaurants, selling the compost tea, which is the water around compost, selling earthworms, which, help the compost grow, and then the natural gas that gets created off the compost. 5 revenue models or revenue streams to test at the first time is impossible. You don't have enough time to do it. So you have to pick 1 or 2. You can list all 5 of them. But more than likely you're going to actually have to tear into just 1 or 2 of them. All right, back to this. I know we're over time. So what I want to do is I just want to wrap up and see if anyone has questions about that. The other thing that to do about this is when you start out, this is, I call it the bowling pin theory of market attack. When you start out, you have 1 application and 1 market segment. You could use, using the language we used a while ago, 1 solution and 1 market segment. And as you grow, you have to be very disciplined about this. This is, again, Kevin made a mistake when he actually tried to build commitment management for the world. Because when you want to grow to the next time, you have to be very disciplined. Do I actually have 1 application and I go, following the green line? Then I'm going to take that 1 application to the second market segment? Or am I taking this, this 1 application, this 1 market segment, and then I go to the second application, selling it to the same market segment? Does this make sense what I'm saying? It's, again, the discipline about how you test and test and test and test versus trying to do all these. This will kill you. This is what killed me. We can talk about that into the future. It's like we said, make a hypothesis and test it. Essentially what we already said, what Paulina's question was, just going through the scientific message in like that. Yeah, it's like a funnel. Igor just asked in the chat, is it like a funnel? It's a funnel saying we're going to start one place. We're going to create a little beachhead market. and then we're going to go expand out. The mistake that too many of us make as entrepreneurs is we try to take everything all at once. What we'll do is we're going to be bringing back some of the other pieces of Venture Forth into this. We won't go into the same depth during Venture Outfitter during this program time that we will in the program class. But I want you to know that there's a lot of the stuff that we're going to be bringing in from Venture Forth. We'll probably bring in some of the Venture Builder concepts as well. We're going to start talking about a lot of the issues about that we were referring to even before the call started, about how to become much more resilient and how to actually drive yourself so that you personally have a chance to be much more resilient. I'm going to bring some of that knowledge back into this, and every once in a while we'll still hear from, we'll still have other experts come in and present to us, but for now, what I want to make sure that we talk about is we will have some of these things we'll bringing back that I'll present because they have all this experience from the past. For today, the only other thing I wanted to do is say this next week, we will have simultaneous Russian translation available. And Courtney will be talking about how to lead sales through empathy. Courtney, if you want to, you can come on and say a little bit more about the program that you're going to do. I'll put you on the spot for a second. And but the key thing that I think is interesting about what Courtney's doing is, since we're taking advantage of doing work across borders, the process that I think that she's going to refer to is really valuable for, how do I actually figure out how to sell into this other market when I'm not of that culture, right? That's one of the things that I know that I'm going to get out of this, just because I've learned a lot from her already in her work, that she's worked across different corporate and country boundaries. Courtney, tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, so thank you, Kevin, for your spin and direction on what I'll be presenting next week. So hi, I'm Courtney. Please tune in next week, same time, same channel, where we'll talk about how to actually close, leading with empathy. And so my background has been about 20 years in technology sales, as well as business strategy and product development. So I often say that I'm multilingual. And so I think that's really the key, is to be able to speak the language of the person that you're articulating, the value proposition to, and to really understand who they are, what they care about, as a mechanism to actually close, not just propose things, but to actually close the sale. And so that's going to be, which seems to be a consistent theme amongst entrepreneurs, is how do I actually close, right? And so that's going to
how do you actually make the sale, right?
How do you actually make the sale, right? Because it's all great, and it's all beautiful ideas, but and you might think that you got them, and you might think that they're interested, but the truth is that results are the only thing that matter, right? And getting that result through empathy and authenticity has been a very effective process for me, and so that's what I'll share.
That sounds great. I look forward to that as well. I think for today, we'll go ahead and call it a day.
I have one quick announcement.
Oh wait, Kristen's got one more thing. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who came to Campfire last week. It was awesome experiment. We have our next one scheduled for July. We have a just very casual happy hour scheduled for June 16th, and it's not going to be Campfire. Yes, RD.
I'm sorry, I didn't want you to cut you off in the middle of the sentence.
Oh, you're fine.
You record these, and I know that I missed one, and you just made mention of missing one. Where do we go to find the recordings?
You can go to our YouTube channel, the Tech Ranch YouTube channel. It's all listed. It's all up to date as of last week. And this one will go on later today. So you can always access the last ones. But we have a casual happy hour, June 16th. We have our next campfire set. And just always go to techranch.com/events for any new events coming up on the calendar. We're adding them all the time. So I just wanted to remind you guys about that.
So June 11th is when Courtney is going to be presenting during the Venture Outfitter time. We also will have earlier that morning, we're going to have a program between Texas and Hungary. If you actually have any interest in joining, the information is not on the calendar just yet, but it will be before the close of business tomorrow. And just look at the techranch.com/events. And you can, if you want to be a part of the conversation about that as well. It's mainly Texas, Hungary. The Consul of Hungary is actually starting to build a bridge through TechRanch with this part of the world, kind of like what we've done with Mexico and Italy and Russia. And so that information will be available. So lots of different events to plug into. We'll continue to have the Venture Outfitter program the way we're doing this. If there's specific expert that you'd like to hear from or a concept that you'd like to make sure that we actually follow up on, just let us know. And I'm always open to recommendations. Just get them to either Kristen or myself, or you can just send it to start@techranch.com. Okay, well, I tell you what, I'll close up today. I appreciate all y'all's interaction. I really like this type of interaction back and forth in the provocative questions about, hey, Kevin, what did you screw up? So keep on keeping the faith. We got a lot of work to do to bring industry back. 40 million people in the US alone lost their jobs. So there's a lot of company building to do and lots of opportunities to be building back and forth. So with that, we'll call today closed. Best of luck with your ventures. Let us know how we can help, and we'll see you next week.